The USS Frontier moved through space like a metal whale swimming through an ocean of stars. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched the darkness ahead where their new home waited. 3 months they had been traveling from Earth, carrying 300 people who wanted to start fresh on a world far from home. The ship was big enough to hold them all, with rooms for families, labs for scientists, and workshops for engineers who would build their new colony. Jake was a good captain, the kind of man people trusted when things got hard. He had gray hair at his temples and calm eyes that never showed fear, even when he felt it. His crew respected him because he never asked them to do something he would not do himself. Lisa Brooks, his first officer, stood beside him looking at the same view. She was younger than Jake, but twice as tough, with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Before joining the colony mission, she had been a soldier for 10 years, fighting in wars that most civilians never heard about. The ship's computers made soft beeping sounds as they scanned the space around them. Everything looked normal until the sensors picked up something that should not have been there. Pete Collins, the chief engineer, called out from his station with worry in his voice. He had found something on the long-range scanners, something big moving toward them from the direction of their destination planet. Jake felt his stomach tighten. They were still weeks away from the Kepler system, too far for any human ship to reach them if trouble started. The thing on the scanners was moving fast, faster than any human ship could travel. As it got closer, the computers were able to see it better. The shape that appeared on their screens made everyone on the bridge go quiet. The alien ship looked like someone had grown a crystal the size of a city and taught it how to fly. It was long and thin with smooth curves that caught the light from distant stars. Strange patterns glowed along its hull in colors that hurt to look at directly. The ship was 3 times bigger than the Frontier and moved without any visible engines, sliding through space as if the laws of physics were just suggestions it chose to follow. Lisa checked the weapon systems out of habit, even though she knew their small defensive guns would be like throwing rocks at a mountain. The alien ship came closer, moving with the confidence of something that had never met anything it could not handle. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for contact, though none of them knew what that would mean. They had always known this day might come, but knowing something and living it were very different things. The alien ship stopped just outside weapons range. Not that the Frontier's weapons would have mattered much anyway. For several minutes, both ships just sat in space looking at each other, like 2 animals trying to decide if the other was dangerous. Then the aliens sent a message. It came through their communication system in perfect English, which was the first surprise. The voice was smooth and cold, like someone reading a grocery list. The aliens called themselves Zephyrians and said they ruled this part of space. They had been watching human radio signals for years and had learned their languages. The voice explained that all ships entering Zephyrian space must follow certain rules. Ships must stop when ordered, submit to inspection, and pay tribute to the Empire. The voice made it sound like these were natural laws like gravity or the speed of light. Jake replied carefully, explaining that the humans were peaceful explorers looking for a new home. They had no wish to cause trouble and were willing to talk about any concerns the Zephyrians might have. His words seemed to amuse the aliens, who responded that all new species said similar things at first. The Zephyrians had been dealing with primitive races for thousands of years and knew how these meetings always ended. The alien ship moved closer and extended what looked like a glass tunnel toward the Frontier's main airlock. The voice explained that Commander Veltar would come aboard to conduct the proper inspection and evaluation. This was not a request. Jake looked at Lisa, who shrugged in a way that said they did not have much choice. The alien ship could probably turn the Frontier into scrap metal without much effort, so cooperation seemed like the only smart option. Jake ordered his crew to prepare the main conference room for visitors and to make sure all weapons were secured. He did not want to give the aliens any reason to think humans were naturally aggressive, even though Lisa had quietly positioned security teams throughout the ship. Better to be ready for trouble than to be surprised by it. The glass tunnel connected with a soft click, and the airlock opened to reveal the first aliens any human had ever seen in person. Commander Veltar was tall, maybe 8 feet, with long arms that moved in ways that seemed wrong to human eyes. His skin was pale blue and seemed to glow from inside like ice with a light underneath. His head was larger than a human head with big dark eyes that looked at everything as if it was slightly disappointing. Behind him came 3 other aliens, all wearing clothes that looked like they had been made from liquid metal. Veltar spoke without moving his mouth, his words coming from a small device on his chest. His voice was the same cold tone they had heard over the radio, but now it filled the room with an authority that made some of the human crew step backward without thinking about it. He looked around the conference room as if he was judging how much it might be worth at an auction. The commander introduced himself formally and explained that he represented the Zephyrian Empire, which had brought peace and order to over 1,000 worlds. He spoke about the Empire as if it was a gift they gave to younger races who were not smart enough to govern themselves properly. His words were polite, but underneath them was the clear message that humans were children who needed adult supervision. Jake tried to maintain diplomatic courtesy as Veltar began asking questions about human technology, population, and military capabilities. Each question felt like a test, and Jake got the feeling that giving the wrong answer might be very dangerous for everyone aboard the Frontier. The next 3 days felt like the longest in Jake Morrison's life. Commander Veltar had made himself comfortable aboard the Frontier, treating the human ship like his personal property. He wandered through the corridors with his alien escorts, examining everything with the casual interest of someone shopping for furniture. The Zephyrians acted like they owned the place, which Jake supposed they probably thought they did. Every morning brought new demands from Veltar. He wanted to see the ship's engines, weapon systems, and computer databases. He questioned the crew about Earth's military strength, population centers, and industrial capacity. When Jake tried to explain that he was just a colony ship captain without access to that kind of information, Veltar looked at him like he was lying. The alien commander seemed to think that all humans shared some kind of hive mind where everyone knew everything. Lisa Brooks watched these interrogations with growing anger. She had spent 10 years fighting enemies who wanted to destroy everything she cared about, and now she had to stand quietly while this blue-skinned alien treated her captain like a servant. Every instinct she had developed as a soldier told her that Veltar was trouble, the kind of trouble that only got worse if you let it continue. Veltar seemed to enjoy making the humans uncomfortable. He would interrupt conversations, demand explanations for simple human customs, and make comments about how primitive their technology appeared. When Dr. Amanda Pierce tried to show him some of their medical equipment, he laughed and said it reminded him of tools his people had used thousands of years ago. When engineer Pete Collins demonstrated their faster-than-light drive, Veltar nodded politely and mentioned that Zephyrian children built more advanced engines for school projects. The worst part was how Veltar talked about other alien species. He mentioned the Trilaxians, who had apparently tried to resist Zephyrian rule before being taught better manners. He spoke about the Corvan traders, who now worked exclusively for the Empire after learning the benefits of cooperation. Every story ended the same way, with proud species becoming grateful servants under Zephyrian guidance. On the second day, Veltar brought aboard something he called an evaluation device. It looked like a silver box covered in lights that hurt to look at directly. The device would measure human capabilities, he explained, to determine what roles humans might fill in the galactic community. He made it sound like a job interview, but Jake could see the threat underneath the polite words. The test started simple enough. Veltar had crew members lift objects, solve puzzles, and answer questions about their specialties. But the alien commander seemed disappointed by what he saw. He commented that humans appeared physically weak compared to most species, with short lifespans that would limit their usefulness. Their technology was crude, their culture was chaotic, and their educational systems seemed designed to waste time rather than create productive citizens. Lisa had to bite her tongue when Veltar suggested that humans might make good servants once they learned proper discipline. The alien commander explained that many species had similar reactions when first contacted by the Empire, but they usually came to appreciate the stability and purpose that Zephyrian rule provided. He made slavery sound like a career opportunity. By the third day, the crew was reaching their breaking point. Veltar had become increasingly demanding, requiring detailed explanations for everything from human eating habits to their entertainment preferences. He seemed particularly fascinated by human violence, asking detailed questions about their wars and weapons. When Jake tried to downplay humanity's military history, Veltar smiled in a way that suggested he already knew more than he was letting on. The situation reached a new low when Veltar decided to conduct what he called a practical evaluation. He wanted to see how humans handled stress and authority, so he began giving orders to the crew directly. He told Dr. Pierce to reorganize her medical bay according to Zephyrian standards. He instructed Pete Collins to modify the ship's engines to be more efficient. He even told the kitchen staff how to prepare food properly. Most of the crew tried to follow these orders, partly out of fear, and partly because Captain Morrison had asked them to cooperate. But Veltar's demands became more unreasonable with each passing hour. He criticized everything they did, comparing their work unfavorably to what other species had accomplished. He acted like a teacher dealing with especially slow students, patient but clearly frustrated by their inability to meet his standards. The breaking point came during what Veltar called a discipline demonstration. He had gathered several crew members in the main conference room to show them proper respect protocols. According to Zephyrian custom, lesser species were expected to lower their eyes and remain silent unless given permission to speak. When one of the younger crew members forgot and looked directly at Veltar while answering a question, the alien commander decided to provide a correction. Veltar moved faster than anyone expected. His long arm shot out and grabbed Pete Collins by the shoulder, lifting the engineer off the ground with casual ease. Collins was not a small man, but Veltar held him up like he weighed nothing. The alien commander explained that physical correction was sometimes necessary when dealing with species that learned slowly. His grip tightened until Collins gasped in pain. The room went dead silent. Every human present felt their blood pressure spike as they watched their friend being hurt by this arrogant alien. Jake stepped forward, his diplomatic mask slipping for the first time, but Veltar was not finished with his lesson. He backhanded Collins across the face with enough force to send the engineer sprawling across the floor. The sound of the impact echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. Veltar looked around at the shocked human faces and seemed pleased with their reaction. He explained that this was how authority worked throughout the galaxy, with strength establishing order and weakness accepting guidance. The humans were learning an important lesson about their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Some species required more correction than others, but they all learned eventually. Lisa Brooks felt something snap inside her chest. She had watched enemies kill her friends, had seen good people die for bad reasons, and had learned to control her anger through years of military discipline. But watching this alien hurt Pete Collins while lecturing them about knowing their place was more than she could take. Her hands clenched into fists as Veltar continued talking about proper respect and natural order. The alien commander turned his back on the fallen engineer and addressed Captain Morrison with even greater arrogance than before. He spoke about the benefits of Zephyrian rule, about how humans would learn to appreciate structure and guidance once they accepted their limitations. His words flowed over the silent room like poison, each sentence making the humans angrier and more helpless. That was when Lisa Brooks stepped forward and threw the punch that changed everything. Lisa Brooks moved like lightning. Her right fist connected with Veltar's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. The alien commander, who had been talking about human weakness just seconds before, stumbled backward with his dark eyes wide in shock. For the first time since boarding their ship, Veltar looked surprised instead of smugly superior. Time seemed to slow down in the conference room. Everyone froze as if someone had pressed a pause button on the universe. The other Zephyrians stared at their commander, who was touching his jaw with one of his long blue fingers. Crix, the nervous translator, made a small squeaking sound and pressed himself against the wall like he wanted to disappear through it. In those 3 seconds after the punch, several different reactions played out simultaneously across the room. Pete Collins, still on the floor where Veltar had thrown him, looked up with amazement and something that might have been gratitude. Captain Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized that diplomatic relations had just taken a very dramatic turn for the worse. The human security team, led by Dan Hayes, tensed up and prepared for whatever was about to happen next, but it was Veltar's reaction that mattered most. The alien commander stood there touching his sore jaw and experiencing something completely new. In over 200 years of life and 50 years of commanding Imperial fleets, no lesser species had ever dared to strike him. The Trilaxians had begged for mercy, the Corvins had tried to bargain, and dozens of other races had either submitted immediately or been crushed by superior technology. None of them had ever responded to Zephyrian authority with direct physical violence. The pain in his jaw was sharp and immediate, much worse than he had expected from such a small creature. Humans had seemed so fragile, With their soft skin and delicate bones, how could something so weak hit so hard? Veltar found himself looking at Lisa Brooks with new eyes, noticing things he had missed before. The way she stood balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction. The controlled aggression in her green eyes that suggested this was not her first fight. The fact that she showed no fear whatsoever, even though she had just assaulted a representative of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Lisa Brooks stared back at Veltar without blinking. Her fist was still clenched and her body was coiled like a spring ready to launch her into another attack. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and she knew it. But watching Pete Collins get hurt while listening to this alien talk about humans learning their place had triggered something primal in her soldier's brain. Some fights were worth having regardless of the consequences. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was really only seconds. Veltar's mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. If this female human could move that fast and hit that hard, what were the rest of them capable of? He had assumed that their small size and apparently fragile construction meant they were naturally passive like most intelligent species. But intelligence and aggression were a dangerous combination, and he was beginning to suspect that humans possessed both in quantities he had not anticipated. Crix, the translator, finally found his voice and whispered something in the Zephyrian language that sounded like a prayer or maybe a curse. The other alien guards reached for their energy weapons, but they moved slowly, uncertain about what they should do. Their commander had been attacked, but he was still standing and had not given any orders. The situation was outside their training and experience. Captain Morrison stepped forward carefully, his hands visible and empty. He knew that the next few seconds would determine whether this ended in talking or shooting. His crew was tough and well-trained, but they were stuck on a ship in deep space with only one way home. Starting a war with the aliens would be suicide, but he also could not let them hurt his people without consequences. Veltar continued to study Lisa Brooks as if she was a puzzle he needed to solve. Something about her posture and the way she moved reminded him of recordings he had seen of apex predators from various worlds. There was a hunting instinct in her eyes that he had never seen in any intelligent species before. Most thinking beings had evolved past their predatory phases before developing technology and space travel. The combination of intelligence and killer instinct was supposed to be extinct in civilized species. The alien commander found himself remembering details from the human files that had seemed unimportant before. Earth was apparently a death world, with gravity higher than most planets and an atmosphere that would be toxic to many species. The humans had evolved in constant competition with large predators, and had survived ice ages that would have wiped out most civilizations. Their entire history was one long story of violence and survival against impossible odds. Dan Hayes and his security team stood ready to act, but waited for orders from their captain. They had positioned themselves around the room during the aliens' visit, just in case diplomacy failed. Now it looked like their caution might pay off. Hayes had noticed the same thing Lisa had seen, that the alien guards moved like people who had never faced real opposition. Their movements were smooth and practiced, but they lacked the edge that came from expecting trouble. Lisa Brooks continued to stare at Veltar, and the alien commander realized that she was not done fighting. She was waiting to see what he would do next, ready to respond with more violence if necessary. This was not the behavior of a primitive creature acting on instinct. This was a trained warrior making tactical decisions while prepared for combat. The implications of that realization sent a chill through Veltar's body that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. In those 3 seconds, everything Veltar thought he knew about humans crumbled like a house made of sand. They were not weak refugees looking for guidance. They were not primitives who needed imperial protection. They were something much more dangerous, something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before. They were a species that had learned to fight before they learned to think. And somehow they had managed to keep both skills as they reached for the stars. The alien commander touched his jaw again and felt the ache where Lisa's fist had connected. Such a small hand, but it had moved with the speed and power of a military weapon. If humans could do that when they were being diplomatic, what could they do when they were actually trying to hurt someone? For the first time in his long career, Commander Veltar felt genuinely afraid. The silence broke like glass shattering when one of the Zephyrian guards finally drew his energy weapon. The movement triggered an immediate response from Dan Hayes and his security team, who had been waiting for exactly this moment. What happened next was not really a fight in any traditional sense. It was more like a demonstration of why humans had survived every threat their homeworld had thrown at them. Hayes moved first, closing the distance between himself and the nearest alien guard in 2 quick steps. The Zephyrian tried to bring his weapon around, but human reflexes proved faster than alien technology. Hayes grabbed the guard's wrist and twisted, using leverage and body weight to send the much larger alien crashing into the wall. The energy weapon clattered across the floor, forgotten in the confusion. The other human security officers acted with the same frightening efficiency. They moved like a pack of wolves, each one knowing exactly what the others would do without needing to communicate. In less than 10 seconds, every Zephyrian guard was on the ground, disarmed and restrained. None of them had been seriously hurt, but they were completely helpless in the hands of creatures they had dismissed as primitive weaklings. Veltar watched his elite, Imperial guards being handled like children by humans who were supposed to be inferior. These guards were trained warriors who had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. They were stronger than humans, had better technology, and possessed centuries more experience. Yet they lay on the floor looking shocked and confused while small human hands held them down with techniques that seemed impossible. Captain Morrison stepped forward, and Veltar noticed that the human's diplomatic mask had finally slipped completely. The polite colonial administrator was gone, replaced by something much harder and more dangerous. Morrison's voice was calm when he spoke, but there was steel underneath the words that made the alien commander's skin crawl. Morrison explained that humans had been very patient with Zephyrian demands, but patience had its limits. He mentioned that his crew had been treating the aliens as honored guests despite their arrogant behavior, but hospitality could be withdrawn if guests became too difficult. The captain's words were still diplomatic, but the meaning behind them was crystal clear. The humans had been choosing to be polite not because they were weak, but because they preferred peace to the alternatives. Dr. Amanda Pierce joined the conversation, and Veltar discovered that human scientists could be just as terrifying as human soldiers. She provided a clinical analysis of what had just happened, explaining human physiological advantages with the detached precision of someone dissecting a laboratory specimen. Humans, she said, had evolved as persistence hunters who could chase prey for days without stopping. Their bones were denser than most species, their muscles were designed for explosive power, and their nervous systems processed combat situations faster than most computers. Pierce mentioned that humans healed from injuries that would cripple other species, adapted to environments that would kill most life forms, and possessed an unusual resistance to psychological trauma. She spoke about human warfare with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather, describing weapons and tactics that made Veltar's advanced civilization seem almost quaint by comparison. Pete Collins, who had gotten back to his feet and was nursing a bruised face, added his own observations about human engineering capabilities. He explained that every piece of technology on the ship had been designed by a species that expected things to break under stress. Human machines were built to keep working after being damaged, to be repaired with simple tools, and to function in conditions that would destroy more elegant designs. They were not pretty, but they were reliable in ways that Zephyrian technology was not. Lisa Brooks, who had started this confrontation, finally spoke up to provide context that made everything else make sense. She described human military history with the casual familiarity of someone who had lived through it. Humans, she explained, had never known galactic peace because they had never known peace at all. Every generation had fought wars that would have wiped out entire civilizations, and somehow they had not only survived, but grown stronger from the experience. She talked about Earth's military conflicts with numbers that made Veltar's head spin. Hundreds of millions of soldiers, thousands of nuclear weapons, wars that lasted for years and killed more people than lived on most planets. She mentioned that every human on the colony ship had military training, because their species considered basic combat skills as necessary as reading or mathematics. The idea of a civilization where everyone was a potential soldier was something that had never occurred to the Zephyrian Empire. Captain Morrison provided the final piece of the puzzle by explaining Earth's industrial capacity. The colony ship represented a tiny fraction of human manufacturing capability, built in a few months by a single small nation. Earth could build thousands of such ships if needed, along with the weapons and soldiers to crew them. The humans had not sent their best technology or their finest warriors to the stars. They had sent farmers and engineers and doctors who wanted to build something new, but who could fight like demons if anyone tried to stop them. Veltar found himself thinking about the implications of what he was learning. The Zephyrian Empire had encountered thousands of species over the millennia, but most of them fell into predictable categories. There were traders who preferred commerce to conflict, artists who valued beauty over power, and scholars who sought knowledge above all else. There were even a few warrior races, but they were usually primitive and easy to manage once their technology was surpassed. Humans seemed to be something entirely different. They were traders and artists and scholars and warriors all at the same time, capable of switching between roles as needed. They could negotiate trade agreements in the morning, compose poetry in the afternoon, and plan military campaigns in the evening without missing a beat. The versatility was both impressive and deeply unsettling. The alien commander realized that his empire had made a fundamental error in judgment. They had assumed that humans were just another developing species that needed guidance and structure. Instead, they had found a civilization that was already as advanced as their own in ways that mattered most. Humans might have simpler technology and shorter lifespans, but they possessed something that the Zephyrians had lost somewhere in their long climb to galactic dominance. They had never forgotten how to fight for what they believed in. As Veltar looked around the conference room at the humans who had just systematically dismantled his escort without breaking a sweat, he began to understand that first contact had gone very wrong indeed. The Zephyrian Empire was not dealing with primitives who needed civilizing. They were dealing with a species of natural warriors who had been politely tolerating imperial arrogance out of diplomatic courtesy. That courtesy, Veltar realized with growing dread, appeared to be running out. The conference room had become very quiet after the demonstration ended. Veltar's guard sat on the floor under human supervision, looking confused and somewhat embarrassed. The alien commander himself stood in the middle of the room, trying to process everything he had learned in the past few minutes. His jaw still ached where Lisa Brooks had hit him, a constant reminder that his assumptions about human capabilities had been completely wrong. Captain Morrison allowed the silence to stretch for a while before speaking again. When he did talk, his voice carried a different tone than it had during the earlier negotiations. The desperate politeness was gone, replaced by the calm confidence of someone who held better cards than his opponent. Morrison explained that humans preferred to solve problems through discussion rather than violence, but they were prepared for either approach if circumstances required it. The captain offered Veltar a choice that was really no choice at all. The Zephyrian Empire could treat humanity as equals and potential partners, or humans would find their own way in the galaxy without imperial guidance. Morrison made it clear that this was not a negotiation or a request for permission. Humans would continue their expansion to the stars regardless of what the Empire decided. The only question was whether that expansion would happen peacefully or through other means. Veltar found himself in a position he had never experienced before. For the first time in his long career, he was the one asking for terms instead of dictating them. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that he felt like he was learning how to walk all over again. Everything he thought he knew about diplomacy and imperial authority had been turned upside down by a single punch from a human female who probably weighed less than one of his arms. Crix, the translator, who had been cowering against the wall during the confrontation, slowly approached Lisa Brooks with the cautious curiosity of someone studying a dangerous animal. He asked her questions about human psychology and culture, trying to understand how a species could be both intelligent and aggressive at the same time. His fascination with human behavior seemed genuine, though it was mixed with obvious fear about what he was learning. Lisa answered his questions with the patient tone of a teacher explaining basic concepts to a slow student. She described human concepts like proportional response and defensive warfare, ideas that seemed to confuse the aliens who were used to dealing with species that either submitted immediately or were crushed completely. The notion that humans could choose their level of violence based on the situation was apparently something new in Zephyrian experience. Dr. Pierce contributed to the education by explaining human adaptability in more detail. She mentioned that most galactic species were specialists who had evolved to fill specific environmental niches, developing advanced technologies to compensate for their limitations. Humans were generalists who could adapt to almost any situation, which made them both versatile and unpredictable. They could be farmers or soldiers or scientists or artists as circumstances required, often switching between roles multiple times in a single lifetime. The conversation revealed fundamental differences in how the two species approached civilization. Zephyrians had achieved peace and stability by creating rigid hierarchies where everyone knew their place and function. Humans had achieved progress through constant competition and conflict, with individuals and groups fighting for resources and ideas in ways that would seem chaotic to more ordered societies. Both systems had produced advanced civilizations, but they were based on completely different principles. Beltar began to understand why human behavior seemed so strange to his people. The Empire was used to dealing with species that valued order and predictability above all else. Humans appeared to thrive on uncertainty and change, treating problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be avoided. They seemed to actually enjoy challenges that would terrify more sensible species. Pete Collins, who had recovered from his earlier rough treatment, joined the discussion to explain human engineering philosophy. He described how human technology was designed to work under adverse conditions, to be maintained by people with limited resources, and to keep functioning even when damaged. Zephyrian technology was more elegant and efficient, but it required controlled environments and specialized maintenance that might not be available in frontier conditions. The engineer mentioned that humans had learned to build things that worked rather than things that were perfect, a philosophy that extended to their social and political systems as well. Human governments were messy and inefficient compared to imperial administration, but they were also more flexible and resistant to catastrophic failure. When human systems broke down, they could be rebuilt or replaced relatively quickly. When imperial systems failed, the consequences could last for generations. As the conversation continued, Feltar realized that the Zephyrian Empire faced a choice that would affect its future for centuries to come. They could try to treat humans as they had treated every other species, demanding submission and tribute while offering protection and guidance in return. But humans had made it clear that such treatment would be rejected, probably violently. The alternative was to accept humanity as an equal partner, something the Empire had never done before. The alien commander found himself thinking about what equal partnership might mean. Humans had technology and perspectives that could benefit Zephyrian civilization, but they also had capabilities that could threaten imperial control if relations went badly. A species that could turn farmers into soldiers and colonies into military bases was not something that could be safely ignored or dismissed. Captain Morrison seemed to understand Feltar's dilemma and offered some reassurance. Humans, he explained, preferred trade and cooperation to conquest and domination. They were willing to share their knowledge and capabilities with species that treated them fairly, but they would defend themselves against anyone who tried to force unwanted changes on their society. The choice between friendship and conflict was entirely up to the Empire. As the meeting wound down, Beltar prepared to return to his ship with a report that would shake the foundations of imperial policy. He had come to the human vessel expecting to conduct a routine evaluation of primitives who needed civilizing. Instead, he had discovered a species that might be more dangerous than anything the Empire had encountered in its long history. But they were also offering partnership instead of demanding conquest, which suggested possibilities that had never existed before. Crix gathered cultural materials that the humans offered as gifts, including examples of their music, literature, and historical records. The translator seemed particularly interested in human military history, though whether that interest was academic or practical remained unclear. The cultural exchange represented something new in Zephyrian experience, the beginning of a relationship between equals rather than masters and servants. Lisa Brooks, who had started the confrontation with a single punch, approached Veltar as he prepared to leave. She offered what might have been an apology for hitting him, though her tone suggested she was not particularly sorry about it. She explained that humans responded poorly to bullying, and that respect had to be earned rather than demanded. Her words carried a warning about future encounters, but also an invitation to try a different approach. As Veltar walked back through the glass tunnel to his ship, he touched his still-sore jaw and began composing a report that would change everything. The Zephyrian Empire had always expanded by finding primitive species and civilizing them according to imperial standards. But humanity represented something entirely different, a civilization that was already civilized in its own unique and terrifying way. The alien commander settled into his command chair and opened a communication channel to the Imperial homeworld. His report would be brief and to the point. The humans were not primitives who needed guidance. They were potential allies who demanded respect. The Empire could choose cooperation or conflict, but it could not choose to ignore them. Veltar's final recommendation was simple and clear. Do not underestimate the humans, ever.